No camera flashes. No grand stadiums. No microphones waiting. The journey to becoming Italy's #1 tennis hope did not begin in Rome, nor Milan, but from a small, silent village nestled in the Dolomites, where winters are long and summers are not warm enough to grow tomatoes. There, a red-haired boy born in 2001 named Jannik Sinner once skied so fast people called him the Mountain Lightning Bolt. But what no one expected was, he gave it all up. Gave up the national medal at age 12. Gave up the lifestyle tied to snow, pine wood, and a slow pace of life. All of it to pursue a game on a brown clay court. For most of the world, Jannik Sinner is a born tennis player. But the truth is, he's not. The first racket was just an oversized toy to him. The first time he stepped onto the court, he didn't have proper sportswear. And when he left home for the academy in Liguria, he brought only one bag, a few sets of clothes, and a promise. I will try, because if I don't, I will never know how far I can go. Jannik did not grow up surrounded by media. No one live-streamed his first practice. No one called him a rising star on Twitter. But in silence, he learned to wash dishes, cook Italian pasta, and personally restring his own racket to save on competition costs. Jannik's story is unlike anyone else's in the modern tennis world. No glamour, no scandals. But precisely because of this, it touches something deeper in each of us. That to go far, sometimes you have to leave behind everything you love most. Subscribe to the Pro Tennis 360 channel to discover the rest of the story. When a boy from a small mountain began to step into the world, not to replace anyone, but to rewrite how a tennis player is born. Where time moves slower, a childhood amidst white snow and the scent of rough wood. Before the world knew the name Jannik Sinner, he was just a red-haired boy living in a snow-covered valley, where every winter morning, the sun struggled to penetrate the Dolomites mountain range. The town of Sesto, tucked between pine forests and ski slopes, is where Jannik grew up, not with grand slam dreams, but with the smell of pine wood burning in the fireplace and the sound of his father's knife and chopping board in the kitchen. His father, Johann, was a chef at a rest stop on the mountain peak. His mother, Siglind, waited tables in the old wooden restaurant down in the valley. Every day they worked 12 hours, sometimes in the $10-carat / circ $C cold, just so the family's dinner table never lacked laughter. Jannik grew up not with video games or iPads, but with evenings spent talking with his parents over a hot pot of soup, recounting the small, everyday stories as if they were treasures. That boy, with hair as red as hot coals in the stove, quickly showed he was different. Not in loudness, but in the way he quietly observed, understood what was important, and never complained. When other children took a winter break, Jannik started skiing. While friends were playing, he practiced turning techniques on the icy slopes as if debating with gravity. At age 7, he was already nicknamed the Lightning Bolt of the Dolomites for his speed and a stoicism rarely seen in childhood. But those close to him knew what made Jannik special was not the result. It was the way he got up after a painful fall, brushed the snow off his shoulders, and continued skiing as if nothing had happened. Perhaps it was the atmosphere of Sesto, peaceful, cold, and full of hardship, that forged a quiet yet sharp soul. And perhaps Jannik would have remained just a child racer if it hadn't been for an incident that seemed very small. Have you ever stood between two choices, one safe and one uncertain, but so compelling you couldn't ignore it? From lightning on snow to the fateful encounter with ball and racket, Jannik was a skiing prodigy. At age 10, he had a national medal, was trained by mountain experts, and was the local area's #1 hope. He won with astonishing composure. Every downhill run was accurate to the millimeter, every body movement as if his body was born knowing how to talk to snow. But during a regional qualifier run, Jannik fell on the steepest curve. It wasn't a scary fall, but the first moment he felt tired. Not physically, but because of the loneliness of the race track. A straight line, no room for error, and no redo if you slipped. It was during the following summer that his father, Johann, first brought Jannik to the village tennis court, just to try something else, with no expectations. But the first contact with the ball changed everything. He held the racket incorrectly, stood in the wrong position, But when the ball bounced up, the instinctive strike made a distinct pop that made everyone on the court stop. A local coach said only one sentence: "This boy was born to play tennis." What captivated Jannik was not just the feeling of winning or the sound of the ball bouncing. It was the thought that every point is a chance to start over. Lost a point? Hit it again. Made a mistake? Fix it next time. Tennis is not a single downhill run. It is a journey of perseverance and adjustment. He started practicing both sports in parallel, skiing in the morning, tennis in the afternoon. But gradually, he went to the court more often, stayed longer after practice, and began practicing serving alone in the hot mountain sun. A boy once destined to be a skiing champion began to wander into another world, a world where he could rewrite his mistakes. And then, tennis was no longer an experiment. It became a choice. The nod to the legendary coach and the promise to leave everything behind. At 13, Jannik received an opportunity every Italian teenager dreamed of, an invitation from Riccardo Piatti, who had coached big names in the ADP. The first time they met at the training camp, Piatti didn't need 10 minutes to realize this red-haired boy was different. Not just in his stroke, but in his eyes, serious, composed, and not seeking compliments. "You have talent," Piatti said, "but talent is not enough. What are you willing to trade to become a champion?" Jannik simply replied, "I am willing to leave the mountains." And that was not an empty phrase. Because a few weeks later, when his parents took Jannik to Prodigy, a coastal city in southern Italy, to begin life at the academy, everything truly changed. No more evenings over a hot soup, no more cold, quiet mountain air. Instead, there was a dormitory, tactical drills, physical training at 5 a.m., and a strict academic schedule. The day his parents left, his mother hugged Jannik tightly. His father just placed a hand on his shoulder, saying softly, "Don't forget where you started, but look forward." Jannik stood silently, watching the car disappear behind the trees. For the first time in his life, he was in a strange place with no relatives, no acquaintances, nothing familiar, except a racket in his hand. And then he started, eating on schedule, sleeping by the training clock, hitting balls until his hands blistered. No one reminded him to sleep, no one cooked. Only the dream and the will remained intact in his heart. Perhaps this is no longer the story of an athlete, but the story of a boy learning to leave his parents' embrace, to stand on his own in a world that is too big, learning to live alone, kitchen, racket, and stringing machine. When you see Jannik Sinner launch a $130 KM/H forehand, you think, that's skill. But few know that behind that shot is a right hand that once blistered from learning to string his own racket. Living at the Piatti Academy, Jannik quickly realized one truth. A tennis career not only costs sweat, but also money. Especially the money for stringing rackets, an absolute necessity for every match. Instead of spending his first prize money from a junior tournament on designer goods, Jannik bought an old stringing machine. Every night after practice, he personally calibrated the string tension, adjusting every millimeter, as if tuning a violin. He also learned to cook, not fancy pasta, but the basics: pan-seared chicken, spaghetti with tomato sauce, stir-fried vegetables. With his roommate, they took turns grocery shopping, washing dishes, and sweeping the floor. Some days they returned from practice late, with only eggs and bread left, but they still turned on music and ate dinner as if they were at a small party. Those moments became Jannik's new family. He once said in an interview, "I didn't learn to cook to be good. I just didn't want to be hungry and dependent." Learning to live alone is a test that no academy teaches. But for Jannik, it became an inseparable part of his professional journey. Every time he personally cooked a meal, every time he strung a racket, every time he washed clothes, was a time he practiced discipline. And perhaps that is why, when he steps onto the court, Jannik doesn't hit the ball because of the pressure to win, but because he knows every point is the result of hundreds of unseen tasks. Alone on the track, the unannounced test. Riccardo Piatti had a rule: no one is always with you, so you must learn how to win when you are alone. For Jannik, That lesson came when Piatti asked him to attend a junior tournament without a coach, without a companion. Just a train ticket, a map, a racket bag, and a simple instruction. Figure it out yourself. The trip was not long geographically, but it was a big step in maturity. On the train, Jannik didn't listen to music. He looked out the window, watching the scenery gradually change from a coast to a strange city. Upon arrival, he took a taxi to the hotel, checked in with the same precise Italian he would later use in interviews, and then went to the practice court. No one reminded him of the time. In the first match, his racket strings went loose after set 1. If it were someone else, they might panic. But Jannik quietly pulled out his mini stringing machine, went into the waiting room, and adjusted. It only took 8 minutes. After that, he won the next 2 sets. When he returned to the academy, he didn't talk about the result. He talked about how he bought the train ticket, how he found hot water at a stadium with no assistance, and how he managed everything from towels to meals himself. Winning is great, but learning how to live without anyone holding your hand is what stays with me throughout my career, Jannik later said. And from then on, every tournament was a test, not just of fitness, but of the ability to cope in a harsh world where everyone only sees the final smash, but never the times you had to go buy muscle cream by yourself in the middle of the night. The unseen falls and the unpraised perseverance. No one succeeds just through winning, and neither did Jannik. After a few impressive junior results, he was invited to an international tournament in Germany. It was the first time he faced players from large academies, complete with nutritionists, strength trainers, and sports psychologists. Jannik, alone with a bag full of gear. The first match, he lost quickly. Continuous double faults. Exhausted body. No one waited for him outside the court. No one hugged his shoulder and said, "It's okay." There was only a 16-year-old boy sitting in the locker room, biting his lip, not crying, because there was no one to cry with. He returned to the academy earlier than expected. While his friends were eating dinner, he went onto the court, turned on the auxiliary lights, and practiced serving alone. From 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. The last serve hit the net cord. He smiled, shook his head. Start over. That story did not appear on any media channel. But for Piatti, it was the moment he knew. This boy doesn't need to win to continue. He practices as if losing is fuel. Later, when Jannik entered the ATP Top 10, people dug into his past. But no one knew that to achieve a stoic forehand, there were countless times he failed without a single spectator. If success is light, then Jannik grew up in the dark. But the darkness is where true courage is forged. From mountain boy to the leader of the new generation. When the ATP first mentioned the name Jannik Sinner as a potential talent, many scoffed. Just another red-haired guy from Italy, a comment on Reddit once read. But people didn't know. Jannik never tried to prove anything. He simply kept going. After every loss, he wrote in his notebook, "What was the mistake? Did I control my emotions? Did I force the angle too early?" And the next day, he returned to the court. He is not the explosive genius type like Kyrgios. He doesn't have the on-court energy of Nadal, nor the classical beauty of Federer. But he has something the entire next-gen generation is lacking, a long-term mindset and emotional stability. In 2019, Jannik shocked the world by winning the next-gen finals at age 18, not thanks to recklessness, but thanks to a game plan that was cold and logical down to every movement. People started calling him the player of the future. Not long after, the boy who once strung his own racket in his room began defeating big names, beating Tsitsipas, pushing Djokovic to 5 sets, taking down Medvedev in unbelievable rallies. But he still carried the same old bag, still didn't use Instagram to brag about his achievements, and still answered the press with short, clear, unembellished sentences. Jannik is not a new wave. He is an undercurrent, silent, cold, and relentlessly advancing. And perhaps that is what makes the tennis world stop asking, who will replace the big three, and start asking, is Jannik Sinner rewriting the definition of a champion? Keeping his feet on the ground when the world wants to lift him to the clouds. When Jannik entered the ATP Top 10, the world started paying attention. Brands came calling, endorsement deals, invitations from fashion magazines, offers to become brand ambassadors. All rushed in as if someone had just discovered a red-haired gold nugget. But Sinner remained the same. He didn't appear at luxurious events, didn't post shirtless photos on Instagram, didn't force a smile in perfume advertisements. On social media, his photos are just moments of practice or a blurry picture of the piano he recently learned to play. In an interview, when asked why he didn't seize the media opportunity, Jannik simply replied, "If you are only good because the media says so, then when they are silent, what do you have left?" The answer was cold, but it was the truth. Jannik understood clearly that a tennis career is not a one-time stage that turns off the lights. It is a marathon. And to run until the end, he needs to keep his feet on the ground, just like when he took the train alone to junior tournaments or cooked pasta in the small kitchen with his roommate. He refused many deals just because it didn't feel right for my values. And while other players launched their own sneaker collections, Jannik still wore his old Asics pair, not for saving money, but because it fits my feet and I play well. In a world where everyone wants to be seen, known, and shared, Jannik chose silence and let his racket speak. Why a Sinner victory is more shocking than a scandal. No one knows exactly when Jannik Sinner became an icon of intentional stoicism. Perhaps it was after the victory against Medvedev, where he didn't celebrate, just walked back to his chair and opened his water bottle. Perhaps it was after being eliminated at Roland Garros, yet staying on the court for 5 minutes to thank the ball kids. No theatrics, no attempt to craft an image, but precisely that made every one of his victories different. When Kyrgios wins, people applaud for the drama. When Tsitsipas wins, the media praises his appearance. But when Sinner wins, that's when people go silent and start thinking. He is the type of athlete that fans don't necessarily have to be fanatic about, but they always respect him, because in him they see their own reflection. Someone who was not born outstanding, who had no media backing, who was not born where tennis is the national religion, yet still tries every day, every serve, every point. He once said, "I don't play to be remembered. I play because this is how I show that I exist." You might not remember where his first victory was, but you'll remember the feeling when watching him play, like witnessing a laser cutting machine, stroke by stroke, that never deviates from its path. And perhaps that is why every time Sinner wins, it causes a shock, not because it is too unexpected, but because it is too right. Sinner is not the successor. He is the one who rewrites the formula for success. When talking about the generation after the Big Three, people often ask, who will replace Federer? Who can be like Nadal? Who has the composure of Djokovic? Jannik Sinner has never tried to be anyone's copy. He doesn't have an artistic playing style, nor is he a warrior driven by rage. What he has is consistency, the ability to move forward without making noise. It's about waking up at 5 a.m. when no one is watching. And perhaps he doesn't need to replace anyone, because that very difference is what tennis needs. A generation that doesn't seek the limelight, but seeks sustainability. Not to stand out today, but to endure in the minds of fans for the long run. Jannik once said, "If you want to go fast, you can run. But if you want to go far, you must take steady steps." At age 23, he is not the greatest player yet, but he is the player the world should watch most closely. And if you also believe that the truth lies behind the lights, subscribe to the Pro Tennis 360 channel. Because here, we tell the stories that the rankings never reflect. In your opinion, will Jannik Sinner be the silent GOAT, or will he ignite tennis in his own way? Leave a comment.